All right. So, the series that we're going to be starting today is we're going to be talking about God's plan. And listen, we all want to know what his plan is for us, right? I'm not the only one. Like, quick show of hands. Who would like an outline from God about his plan for your life in your inbox, like right now? Man, I would love that. It would be so great. It would be so awesome to know all of God's plans for my life. Or really, actually, if I were to be really honest with you guys here, what I really want is to know that my plans and God's plans match up. You guys know what I mean? And really, like if we were going to lay it all out on the table, we're all friends here. What I really want, like if I could get exactly what I wanted with this, is really just to give God my plans for my life and then have him alter his plans to sort of match up with mine. I can't be the only one. Am I the only one here? I can't be the only one. Like, I know that we say that we want God's plans for our life, but don't we actually mean that we just want God to agree with the plans that we've already made? Come on, we're all friends here. And listen, while I get it, trust me, I do get it. That's not the way this works. And frankly, it's a good thing that it doesn't work out that way. And that's what we're going to go over in this series, how to actually surrender our plans to God's plans once and for all. And we're going to break it down a little bit to do so. So today we're going to be starting with the worst part about submitting to God's plan, and that's submitting to God's perfect timing. Since we're all friends here, can I admit something to you guys? I hate when people say it's all in God's perfect time. And yes, even though I hate hearing it, I am guilty of saying it. And look, I know that it's supposed to make us all feel better about waiting, but here's the thing, waiting is miserable. Anyone here like to wait? No? Yeah, I hate it. Hating is my least favorite thing to do in the whole world. And you know what I do a lot of? I do a lot of waiting. Like at work, when I submit an app, guess what I have to do? I have to wait for it to be processed. I'm hungry, I put a pizza in the oven, guess what I'm doing? Waiting for it to cook. And listen, I may or may not have binge watched the current season that I'm watching, all of their episodes. I've been waiting for it for the last 2 years, and now I have to wait some more for the next edition to come out in June. Like, I'm doing a lot of waiting. There's so much waiting. This is why we humans, we love a good shortcut. Microwaves, Amazon Prime, my Kindle. You know what's so great about all of those things? They are shortcuts to getting the things that we want. We love shortcuts. And listen, when we find one, we tell everyone about them, like a public service announcement, because we all hate waiting. And can we be honest for just a minute here? We also like to find shortcuts for God's plans. This is where we take matters into our own hands to obtain the results that we want and completely disregard God's timing for those things in our life. Sort of like our buddy Abram or Abraham. Abraham also had an issue with being patient for God's timing, and we find his story in Genesis. It starts in Genesis 12:1. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your land, your relatives, your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse anyone who treats you with contempt, and all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you." God is laying out some pretty big plans for Abram. Soon to be called Abraham, in case you guys were wondering about the name switch here, God tells him that he is going to make him a great nation. And you know what a great nation needs? Needs heirs. A nation needs heirs. Guess what Abram does not have at this moment? He has no children. He and his wife Sarai have no children. So he tells Abram he has this specific plan for him, that he is going to be a great nation. He also tells them, hey, there's this specific place, this land that I have set aside that I want you to dwell in. So he's going to have this new place and heirs. And not only will Abram be blessed, but listen, God's going to use Abram to bless everyone through him. There's some big plans here. So Abram does leave. He leaves and he travels to Egypt. Now here's our first problem. Egypt is not the land that God promised to give him. Does anyone else find this a little bit strange, right? Abram is told to leave his land that God set aside for him, but he doesn't immediately goes there. He first goes to Egypt. Now, evidently, there is a famine in the land, so that's why they travel to Egypt first. And in this story in Egypt, it's found in Genesis 12 as well. It's just a weird story. I don't know if you guys have read it. I'm going to give you the super Cliff Notes version here. Evidently, his wife Sarai was a pretty attractive woman. And Abram was evidently lacking a little bit of faith. He had enough faith to leave his homeland, but when he gets to Egypt, he's concerned that the Pharaoh is going to kill him to take his wife. And so he tells Sarai, hey, let's just tell everybody that we're siblings. We're not husband and wife, we're brother and sister. I told you it was a weird story. Well, not only do the Egyptians buy the whole sister story, the Pharaoh does in fact take Sarai as his wife, and God is not pleased. In verse 17, God sends 7 plagues on Egypt because of it. This evidently clues the Pharaoh in of Abram's deceit and tells him to take his wife and go. Super weird story, right? And look, while I have no idea really why God does this, because the scriptures does not say the intent behind it, what I do know, if I'm standing in Abram's shoes and I am watching God rain 7 plagues down, what am I doing? I'm gaining some faith in who God is. I'm seeing God show up in a pretty incredible and a pretty mighty way. I tell you this because it would increase my faith. So God told Abram that he's going to bless him. He's going to make him this mighty nation. He's going to bless everyone through him. This would have been really hard to accomplish if Abram loses his wife before he even gets to the land that he's going. So God doesn't just send down 1 plague, he sends down 7. So again, while I don't know scripturally why God does this, why he sends them to Egypt, what I can say is that if I'm in his place, it would certainly increase my faith in God and recognize that God does honor his promises. Okay, now we're going to go through some major cliff notes here. Chapter 13, Abram and Lot, his nephews, separate. They spread out a little bit. Lot gets captured in 14 and Uncle Abraham rescues him. Now we're in chapter 15. We're seeing some of Abram's impatience showing up. And the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, telling him not to be afraid and that God is his shield. And then in Genesis 15, 2-3, Abram says this, Lord God, what can you give me since I am childless and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus? Abram continued, look, you have given me no offspring, so a slave born in my house will be my heir. Do you hear the impatience in his voice? Because I do. Listen, he's saying, God, I have faithfully served you. I've moved when you told me to move. I saved my nephew and then gave 1/10 of all of my spoils to you. I have faithfully given every bit of my life to you, but how can I become a mighty nation when my line ends with me? So God gets a little bit more specific with his plan for him in Genesis 15, 4-5. Now the word of the Lord came to him, this one will not be your heir. Instead, one who comes from your own body will be your heir. He took him outside and said, look at the sky and count the stars if you're able to count them. Then he said to him, your offspring will be more numerous. Did God have a plan for him? Absolutely. And what does Abram do with this new knowledge of this new plan? He takes a shortcut. We are now to the meat of the message, Genesis 16:2. Sarai said to Abram, since the Lord has prevented me from bearing children, go to my slave, perhaps through her I can build my family. So Sarai and Abram, what they're really saying here is, you know what? God's taking too long. Sarai even says, God is preventing me from having a child. So they decide to take matters into their own hands, and Abram gets a child with Hagar. Now, you know that's a dumb idea. I know that's a dumb idea. But they were so focused on trying to find the shortcut to get the thing that they wanted that they ignored all of the warning bells that had to have been going off in their brain, and they decided to pull a little Frank Sinatra here and do it their own way. And yet, it Yes, it horribly backfires on them because Hagar does, in fact, get pregnant. And guess how Abram's wife feels about that? Not great. Even though it's her own idea, she's so mad at Abram for doing what she told him to do, and she's mad at Hagar, who, listen, I'm sure had zero choice in this whole matter, right, for getting pregnant. So she's so mad, in fact, that Sarai actually mistreats Hagar. She mistreats her so much that Hagar just runs away. It's a mess. Okay, so here's what we've got. God's plan, make Abram a mighty nation. His offspring will be more numerous than the stars, but they're childless. They're kind of old. When God calls Abram first in chapter 12, Abram is 75, Sarai is 65, and then Hagar, when she gets pregnant with Ishmael, Abraham's 86. So they had to wait 10 years. And they got decided after 10 years that they're tired of waiting. They no longer trusted God's plan and God's timing. They decided to do things on their own. We do the same thing in 2024. Christians in 2024 are still looking for shortcuts to get what they want. They're rushing things and they're settling for less, all trying to get what they want instead of waiting for God's best. A great example would be Christians rushing through their spiritual growth. Probably not what you guys thought I was going to say here. And you're right, there are definitely other things that we rush as Christians. But this is one that I do see pretty often in the faith, and it can really derail a person. Spiritual growth is just that. It is growth. It doesn't happen overnight, and you shouldn't rush it. And I'll use myself as an example. I know that I have said I've never felt called really to be a pastor, and that's mostly true. When I first started really giving my life to God, this is right after Johnny and I got married and right after I had Nate, I did feel a call into ministry. Now, I didn't know exactly what that looked like, but I did go to Pastor Uncle Fred, and I did ask him to ordain me because I thought that God had called me to be a pastor. To his credit, Pastor Uncle Fred didn't just outright refuse, but he did subtly, gently pump my brakes a little bit. And he gave me this book that he first wanted me to go through with him. Of course I agreed, right? I was in my early 20s, and so we started. We met for the first chapter a week later. And then the second chapter, it was probably a week and a half. And then the third chapter, it was about a month later. And soon after that, I stopped reading the book. We stopped meeting. And he never really pushed me or guilted me because I had dropped the book, which I'm really thankful for. Because the truth was, it wasn't the right time for me. It wasn't the right season in my life. I wasn't ready. I had a new husband. I had a new baby. I was still starting my career. I needed to wait. And I do believe if I had rushed into it, if I had rushed into being ordained and maybe trying to be a pastor in my early 20s, right, it would have been awful. I personally wasn't spiritually mature enough and ready. I needed to wait. And there is a danger to not waiting because stepping outside of God's will does have consequences. Now, for Abram and Sarai, there were consequences, and not just to their marriage because Hagar did indeed give birth to Ishmael. In Genesis 16:11, it says, "The angel of the Lord said to her, 'You have conceived, and you will have a son. You will name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your cry of affliction. This man will be like a wild donkey. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him. He will settle near his relatives.'" Ishmael is considered to be the patriarch of the Islamic religion. God did indeed keep his covenant with Abram and blessed his seed. And the evidence of the enmity that the angel speaks about in this scripture, we still see it today. It is still playing out today in the Middle East. Because there are consequences to stepping outside of God's plan. There are consequences to rushing and not trusting in God's timing. Refusing to wait for God's best can result in you settling and not seeing his plans truly come to fruition in your life. And I know what you're thinking, but I hate waiting. That's why we need to shift our perspective on the purpose of waiting. God doesn't make us wait because he's mean. He doesn't make us wait because it's some kind of a punishment. We get ready in the waiting. The waiting has a purpose. One of my ministry buddies said it like this, that character work is done in the valleys, in those times of waiting. That's when you get refined. That's when your faith grows. Look at Abram and Sarai. God called them and they did a lot of waiting, 25 years to be exact. And those years were not wasted. Those years increased and grew their faith in God and enabled Abram to settle into his new identity as Abraham and truly be the father of many nations, establishing God's covenant with his people. Ecclesiastes says it like this. Ecclesiastes 3:1 and verse 4. To everything there is a season, a time and a purpose under heaven, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. We rush the weeping to get to the laughing, and when we do, the laughing isn't as sweet. We brush past the mourning to get to the dancing, and when we do, the dancing falls flat. There is a reason and a season and why we wait. Healing happens in the weeping. Growth happens in the mourning. If we rush through those things, if we don't wait on God's timing, then we risk not experiencing the true depth of joy in the seasons of joy. Wait on God. Wait on his timing. Trust that your Creator, the one that knit you in the womb and can count the hairs on your head, knows what you need, and more importantly, knows when you need it. Don't sacrifice God's best on the altar of your impatience. Wait, trust, and shift your perspective to appreciate the waiting, because the waiting is where the real work is done. And if you're wondering, how will we know if we're rushing and not waiting on God? Well, we're going to dive into that next week. Let's pray.